Call to order the September 17th, 2024 meeting of the Policy Management Committee. I'm Rebecca Spondrowski, chair of the committee, and I would like to take a moment first to let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Pernille Suvarna, student member of the board, excited to be here.
Good afternoon, Shebra Evans, District 4.
Good afternoon, Brenda Wolf, District 5.
Well, thank you. First order of business is the informational summary. I would like to have staff introduce themselves as well, but we can wait until once we get started. Does anybody have any questions or concerns or comments about the informational summary from last meeting? No? All right, then we're going to keep moving. Going right along. I promised Ms. Wolf that we'd be brief. So why don't we take this chance right now to let staff introduce themselves, and then we can get into what we're going to talk about.
Good afternoon, Tom Lockman, Deputy Chief of Staff in the Board of Education office.
Victoria Van Dyke, board staff.
Sally Davis, Supervisor of Policy and Regulations in the Office of the General Counsel.
Leslie Turner Percival, Legal Director in the Office of General Counsel, overseeing transactions and policy.
Great. Thank you all for being here, everybody. So the items on our agenda for today, we're going to look at the draft 2024 to 2025 work plan for the Policy Management Committee. We'll be looking at technical amendments for policy ACF, the sexual misconduct and sex-based harassment of students, as well as policy BLB, rules of procedures in appeals and hearings. And we will have an initial discussion about the school year calendar, which is always a favorite topic. So the committee is also receiving an item of information on MCPS regulations, which has been approved by the superintendent's office since the committee's last meeting. So with that overview, if there are no questions from any of my colleagues, we can get started. Let's go with the discussion of the draft work plan. I turn it over to staff.
Okay, and can we adjust the TV screen? That item will be coming up in a minute. Okay, so let me focus first on the work plan for this year. So committee members will notice the 6 substantial policies were significantly revised last year, and the amended family school partnerships for one was several years in the process. But other rewrites that contributed significantly to pressing issues were policy IJA, mental health and social emotional well-being of students, IKB, the homework policy, IOD, English language development programs and services, and GEA, the board process for appointing MCPS leaders. And so this year, the proposed work plan will address additional personnel issues and introduce finance policies that are in need of review and updating. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Turner Percival. Leslie?
Thanks. I'm going to talk about the finance policies. So there are 3 finance policies that are recommended through the Board Fiscal Management Committee and the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. That's policy DAA, Fiscal Responsibility and Control, and it's being recommended to include additional fiscal responsibilities and controls that have been implemented since the last policy update. There's also policy DIG, operating fund investments, is being recommended to reflect revised practices regarding pension fund investments and county management of the Post-Employment Benefits Trust Fund since the last policy update. And lastly, policy GIG, funding retirement pension system, is being recommended for technical amendments to directory information, office names in particular. All right, and Mrs. Yvonne Alfonso Windsor, Acting Chief Financial Officer, is available to answer any questions you may have regarding the intents of these updates.
And that's in reference to our work plan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
I had one question quickly about the, previously I thought that we put the dates of the potential dates of upcoming meetings on our work plan. Do we not do that?
No, We have found that they
Shuffle too much?
shuffle a bit. Do you have a specific one you're interested in?
No, I was just curious as to how they were going to be spaced and what's coming to which meetings, potentially. But we,
Mrs. Mondrowski, if I can add a little bit of context to
please.
that. Because for the two items that were referenced that are financial policies, we're working with staff and in conjunction with the Fiscal Management Committee, who has been working around the issues that then will come to Policy Committee. So some of it was because the policy management work will be second in the sequence there.
Right.
So, as soon as fiscal management has completed their work in identifying those matters, they will then come. But I think it was just putting the puzzle pieces together in that regard.
okay, great.
I can respond that we had moved the personnel work in front of the finance work to give some more time for that process to unroll.
Oh, good, okay. Yeah, I was going to say. Well, do any of my colleagues have any comments or questions about the draft work plan before we send it, or approve it to be sent to the full board? Ms. Evans? No? Okay. All right, in that case, I would need a motion to move this on to the full board.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? And that's unanimous. We can keep moving. Next up, we'll have you go ahead and do a review of the two technical amendments, or the technical amendments to the two policies, the other two policies.
So today, you have draft technical amendments to policy ACF, which is a policy governing sexual misconduct by students and sexual harassment of students. These technical amendments comply with updated federal rules. Today, we're asking you to move updates on page 3 forward to the full board as technical amendments. And I can walk you through those if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay. So starting on page 3 of the draft, line 80, we use the term sex-based harassment. We have updated that terminology to align with the federal rule. And we've updated that terminology throughout the document.
Can I just ask a question? I want to understand on page 3, B1B. Just want to know, is that the language that they're using? Because it's actually it's not that it's confusing. I could see that it could be kind of hard to implement. And I'm talking in about the part that says, and is so severe or pervasive. So is that the way that they framed it? Okay, so what you
Yes.
did was you just lifted their language and put it in here.
Exactly right.
Okay, I was just,
Clarifying.
yeah, well, I just wanted to understand because it's not exactly written so that a layperson would be clear about what the standard is going to be that's applied. But if that's the language they're using, that's fine. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or clarifications that they'd like to have made? No? Okay, well, then, in that case, I look forward to having staff bring policy BLB back to the Policy Management Committee at its November 14th meeting. Am I on the wrong one?
No, so I think what we would be looking to do is get a vote to move the technical amendments on ACF
Okay.
to today, to move that forward to the board for final board approval on the 10th of October. BLB we will discuss, and then that will likely come back to policy. That will come back to policy committee again in November before going to the board.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Wolf had another question.
Yeah, it was just about, it's along the same lines. B2, is that the language that they're using? Because it's a little bit unclear to me. What does that mean? If you're with an MCPS program and you go out of the country with the students?
Yes, that language was changed again in line with the federal rule. And it specifically says a recipient has an obligation to address a sex-based hostile environment under its education program or activity, even when some conduct alleged to be contributing to the hostile environment occurred outside the recipient's education program or activity or outside the United States.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay. In that case, I will need a motion to forward the technical amendments to policy ACF to the full board for final approval.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Great. And so it passes, and we will unanimously, and we will move that to the full board. Next, we'll talk about the technical amendments of BLB, having gotten ahead of myself before, so I'll turn it back over to you, Sally.
Okay, that's fine. So turning next to the technical amendments to BLB, we did not bring you a draft today, but we'll return to the next committee meeting after discussing. So I just wanted to make sure you're clear that what you have in front of you is the October 26, 2023 policy approved by the board. We have annotated it for you for just discussion for today. So you'll see on page 5, some of the things we're discussing. I'm sorry, page 4, where some of the things we're discussing. So first was a thought to align your board language with state board language. State Board of Education page limits are stated in the Code of Maryland regulations and require that appeals to the state board be no longer than 15 pages, excluding attachments. What we have used in the current iteration of the policy is the term concise statement throughout. So we thought that using that COMAR language should give a little more clarity to what constitutes concise. So that is one thing we are suggesting be brought forward as a technical amendment. And I have one more, but what are your thoughts on that?
Colleagues?
That's fine.
We're good.
Okay. Now, the second update is to clarify language so that the intent of using school days as opposed to calendar days in a certain location is working as it's intended. So we'd like to study this further because there are several regulations that are tangential and aligned and related, and we just want to make sure we've, dotted all the i's and crossed all the t's. But if I can draw your attention again to page 4, the intent was to be cognizant of extended school breaks or school closures when school staff would not be available to respond to board staff. And we were thinking specifically of winter break, right? Now, the result was creating a difficulty in responding to appeals specifically related to change of school assignment, because these decisions are frequently appealed over the summer break. So while we would, again, like the opportunity to think a little bit further, we believe we may be able to accomplish the intent of the board's previous iteration of this by changing 10 school days to 15 calendar days. So with your guidance, we'd like to proceed along these lines and bring a draft to the next meeting. And Dr. Jones is available if you have any further questions or if there needs to be further clarification.
No, we had already spoken about it, so I'm very comfortable with moving that forward, unless anybody else. Nope, looks like we're good.
Excellent. We will do that.
Okay, so in that case then, I'll look forward to staff bringing this final draft of technical amendments to the Policy Management Committee meeting on November 14th. And that brings us to item number 5, discussion of the school year calendar. Like I said, a favorite topic for everybody. We need to turn your light on. Thanks.
I haven't sat at this table yet. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is such a pleasure to be here. I apologize, and my beloved chief apologizes for being unable to join us, but she is here in spirit, and equally as excited about this work as I am. So thank you. Today, we are going to talk about the draft school calendar for 25-26, which is hard to believe a whole year from now. We actually did a lot of work last year, really thinking about this work, knowing that a lot of the questions that we were asking and the ideas that we were bringing up were things that we would want to continue to really talk about and focus on as it relates to interests from our students, our staff, our families, the community. And so we were really excited to start this work earlier than we had in the past. We always want to think about elevating that idea of academic excellence. I was a teacher, a math teacher, and so we always want to think about that. We also really want to think about the idea of well-being and family engagement, as well as, coming from the operations world now, that idea of professional and operational excellence. And so kind of bringing together all of that when we think about the calendar. It is literally, as I said to the students earlier this week, last week, my favorite thing to work on, because it is literally for students. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. We make this for them. And so it's such an exciting thing, but there are a lot of pieces to it. And so we have our educational interests and things that we need to really think about. We have operational needs. We think about the mandated school closures. We think about the minimum number of instructional days and credit hours. We also think about those professional days and those early release days and grading and reporting and our assessment schedules. And then things like emergency closures and things that are sort of outside of our control as we put together all of these pieces. And so we're very excited to begin this conversation. We're a little earlier than last year, but nevertheless, still excited to be here.
Always the sooner the better.
Yeah, no, that's kind of how we felt as well. Okay, so you can just see some of the conversations that we're going to have within this discussion. We always like to benchmark. We love feedback. We are going to talk about winter break and this transition day and really thinking ahead to that idea of 2 years and planning like that, and then just what we're going to do next and thinking about those different ways in which we engage people to make sure that we get, sort of the voice of as many different people in the county as we can. Okay, so this is our timeline. As you can see, we started last November. And so one of the things that was really exciting for us was to ask questions about this calendar that we're going to be talking about way back before we even adopted the 24-25. And so that was very exciting. We have already begun our initial discussions. We actually waited on the survey for this meeting. And the reason that we did that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, is because we had such good turnout and such positive reaction to the last one that we really wanted to get it right. We didn't want to put something out and then say, we have to do another one, because what we really want is for people to be able to give their feedback and to see that it's being used in the development of the calendar. And so that's really important to us. And so we ended up just waiting a little bit so that we could make sure that what we're asking is really relevant to what we're going to be looking at. And then obviously we have our meeting today, and then looking ahead to the board meeting, as well as follow-up policy management, and then December when we adopt the calendar. So that is our timeline, and we're very excited. And like I said, the recommendations from this discussion will really sort of inform our next steps for that. Okay, one of the things that we really like to look at, because everyone asks, is what are other schools doing? What are other school systems doing? And so what we were able to do was to pull from the school systems that do a 2-year cycle. So they have this available, and really start to think about what are some of those key pieces of a calendar build that they've already established. And so one of the things you'll notice is that all of the school systems that are listed start before Labor Day. The other thing that you'll notice is that they all have a little bit longer of a winter break than normal. If you notice at the bottom, Prince George's County calendar is not available yet. They actually adopted their calendar in February. And I've already met with that team to start looking at planning so that we can do some of our planning together, since we're sort of at the same stage of that cycle of work. And so that's been very exciting to connect with some of the other counties around this work. Okay, so this is my favorite part. So last year, in our survey that we put out that sort of had people say, okay, which calendar you think you want, we asked some questions about 25, 26. And we got a lot of responses about this part. So I think it was over 9,000 people weighed in on this piece of it. And so some of the things that we heard loud and clear were that they liked starting before Labor Day. They really were interested in exploring a longer winter break. It's interesting because at the time that we asked it was right before winter break, so you always wonder when the timing is, but we committed to sort of looking at that. And then the other thing is we had heard a lot of positive feedback on the template that we sort of reimagined last year with that monthly look. Mm-hmm. And so we were thrilled that people were excited about it, but started to think about, well, how could we make it better? Because I was still meeting with people after we had adopted the calendar, and they were saying things like, well, how do I know when my kids go to school? That's all I want to know. How do I know that? I don't know what these different things mean. What's a non-instructional day? What's a professional day? Just tell me when my kid goes to school. And so that really stuck with me. And so when we started to think about a template, I started to think about colors. And we do that with weather and thinking about colors. And so one of the things that we sort of landed on in this idea of a draft is green means go. So if you see green, it means you go to school. And so for our students and our families who aren't as familiar with some of those phrases that we use in MCPS to be, a system-wide closure, a non-instructional day, this or that, just tell me when I'm supposed to go to school. And then what we came on with yellow is that yellow was professional day. So sort of like a stoplight, like go, slow, stop. And red was teachers and students are not in school. And so this is something else that we're bringing forward in terms of the accessibility of that monthly template. So how do we make it even more friendly for families to look at? And so this was sort of where we landed. Now, for those of us diehard fans who love the older version of the calendar with the numbers and, sort of the horizontal view, they'll be happy to know that we still have to make that, because that's how I count the number of days in a marking period. And we'll still have that available, but we're really excited to bring this forward with the drafts to get feedback and say, does this make sense? Is this sort of giving you that sense of when your children are in school? And there's a key at the bottom that also shows things like ER, which is early release. We sometimes call that a half day, but it's not technically a half day. And so playing around with what that looks like, and the stars for makeup days, because we have to include those in our calendar as well. So that was something that we were very excited about. When we think about, we did something last year that seemed to work well, but we can always improve. And so as we go forward, how are we making this even more accessible for families? And so this was sort of a part of the work that we wanted to highlight and really wanted you to see. In addition to that, we're going to look at some innovative things that we're talking about for this year. So every year we kind of think of what can we really think about to make a school year start well and really set the stage for students to learn and to be excited. My son went to high school for the first time this year. So it was really, top of mind for me thinking about that. What makes someone feel welcome and connected to a school? And so one of the things that we're going to bring to you today for discussion is this idea of a transition day. And Dr. Taylor was very excited about this idea coming from his school system and thinking about what could we do to help students who are sort of new to that environment feel more welcome. And so one of the things when I started to think about this and, this idea came up, I started thinking about being a math teacher. And so many, many years ago, when I first started teaching math, we would talk about fitting in a math class and feeling like I belong here, or this is where, people think I'm smart, or people think I'm smart enough to be in this space. And so we would talk about sense of belonging and the value of that. If your teacher thinks you belong in a class, you're more likely to come in the door. You're more likely to do the work. You're more likely to feel a connection. And the same thing goes for schools. And so the idea is if you feel that people want you there, you feel welcome, then you're more likely to want to be there. And so when we think about how to start that work, we started thinking about this idea of a transition day. And so it would really be this way of highlighting and emphasizing that sense of belonging. How do you make people who are new and anxious and uncomfortable and nervous feel more comfortable? And so this was sort of our first crack at this idea. And so a couple things that are important to think about are why it's important for children. What does it look like for staff and families? And what does it look like operationally? And so as we're sort of looking at all of those pieces, we really need to have, part of this discussion today to talk about that, since it is something that we do as part of our, student orientation during pre-service, and some schools offer different opportunities throughout the summer and at the end of the school year. But what would it look like if all the schools in Montgomery County said this was something that we want to do that's important? And so this was a part of something we wanted to bring today for discussion to think about for 25, 26, and beyond. And so with that, I'm going to move into looking at 2 of the draft calendars that we're bringing forward today.
Can we take a moment to ask questions and have a little brief discussion on some of what you've just? Of course. Ms. Evans?
Yep. So you've given this a lot of thought, I can tell, and you are super excited about it. I appreciate that. I like the color changes because instructional day and some of that was a little bit confusing for our parents. So I do think, and I don't want to say it was for everyone, but I think yellow, green, and red is pretty straightforward and should be helpful. Then we got the purple. So the transition day. So this is for every single student at every single school coming to school the first day. And just, if I'm not mistaken, you said it's a way for us to build community with our students and not getting straight into work the first day. Am I misunderstanding how
Yeah.
that first day, that transition day would work?
Yeah, you're misunderstanding.
Okay.
Well, it's a great question.
Oh, yeah, so explain transition again to me, because I don't think I...
So our initial thoughts were thinking of the children who are transitioning to those schools. So whether that's
Oh, like kindergarten,
But I'm glad you
6th
asked.
grade, 9th grade. Oh,
and even third, thinking about our 3 to 5 schools. But it's a great question to ask.
and
as
you have
this
it
is
here. You have it
something-
here, K, 6, and 9. Like, I can't see. I saw that, but it just went up.
But it's a great question, and as this is something new, we think about getting feedback from everyone, and so.
So let me ask this question. Because what we do currently is we have sort of a transition day for our students during the summer, or like an orientation before the first week of school. So you're saying take those days and make it the first day of school instead? Because we do that for,
Also a great question.
yeah.
So the idea was to move the Thursday before pre-service orientation to this day.
Okay.
It wouldn't necessarily take away those other opportunities that schools use to, let's say, welcome a new principal or open a new school building or have those opportunities where they get to know families. It wouldn't take away from those experiences, but the idea was what is typically that Thursday before the first day of school during pre-service week would be that Monday.
So essentially, the first day of school wouldn't be the Monday, it would be Tuesday. So all we did, we just was moving the day from the week prior to the week of school. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm still
I want to know,
thinking.
is this a mandatory attendance day?
It's a great question. So I asked the state because I also do the weather. And so when we think about inclement weather and makeup days and the changes that were made by MSDE last year to have in-person makeup days, that was a very important question that I had to ask beforehand. And so when I approached MSDE about this, what they said is, if you're considering it just for, sort of that K, 6, and 9 transition students, as well as the students who are new to Montgomery County, whether they come in through our international admissions sort of process, or they just are new to MCPS from all the different grade levels, that it doesn't count as an instructional day if it's done as K, 6, and 9. But I wanted to get clarity from MSDE because that matters for the build of the calendar, it matters for instructional planning, and it also matters for those snow day, makeup day, things that we have to, think ahead for.
Okay, so assuming that, we like this and the board goes through with it, I think you might want to collect some evaluation data of how many of those students actually came that day, as opposed to just adding on a day to their summer vacation. Just so
great
that we
idea.
have
Yeah.
that kind of information to consider the next year. Thank you.
Yeah.
A couple of my concerns I mentioned previously to you, but so if it's only for new students as well as transitioning students, if I'm an 11th grader and I'm new to the system, I have to be there by myself, or if I'm the only new person, or do I hang out with the 9th graders? Just curious how that.
It's a great question. And so one of the things that struck me about this idea was, how do you get feedback and how do you get input on this?
Sure.
And so that would be to go to the children and ask them. And so one of the things that I'm very excited to do is to ask them what would have made you feel more comfortable, whether you were new to 9th grade, new to 6th grade, a 5th grader leaving to go to 6th grade and thinking back to their years in elementary school, or, someone who came in 10th grade. What would have made you feel welcome and made you feel a connection to the school early? And so it's a great question because we want to ask the children that and see what they say and really sort of design that around what makes the most sense for them. And so I'm excited to collect that data and really think about what would that look like? Because you're right, typically it is, incoming 6th graders when I was in a middle school, or incoming 9th graders when I was in a high school, and then the new kids, and they kind of go together and they do a few things. But when you think about really welcoming them and really making sure that I understand what it means to be an 11th grader here and not a brand new 9th grader, that's different and that matters. And so it is a great question, and it's something that we do want to ask and make sure that we understand from the perspective of those children.
Is it also another way for us to give everyone coming into the building an actual full week to get themselves ready prior to students coming into the building?
So it wasn't the initial intent of the idea of
It does help,
but
though.
sometimes.
Yeah, it does help.
Because I was wondering
sometimes-
why we couldn't put it on the Friday before. I mean, I know it's an in-service day for teachers, but if the teachers are going to be required to be in school for the transition day anyways, and they're required to be there, even if they just made it a half day so that the teachers can still get the professional development aspect for half of the day. Personally, I would prefer that. I think it's a lot to ask for families to have one more day in the beginning of a week where they're not, where the kids aren't going to school and they're worried about childcare, and if it's their older child who watches the younger children and they're suddenly off at school, but their younger children are not, and that's another day off from them. And I was curious about K through 2 schools. Do the 3rd graders go as well? And enrichment programs that start in fourth grade, do they go then as fifth graders? How are we, if you're just joining a new program, do you attend, what qualifies as new?
These are all excellent questions and things that, as we begin to think about it, are things that it's my responsibility to now go ask those questions because that's what we need to know from people. And one of the things I think we've committed to in this county is making sure that we get feedback from everyone and really try to think about every nuance so that we have planned well. Right. And so if the idea is to welcome children, we need to think about all those pieces of it. And we need to think about their families, and we need to think about the staff, and we need to ask everyone, and really bring to you the feedback that we've gotten so that you have all of that to look at. And so that's why I'm taking notes.
Yeah,
I take that
I appreciate it.
I take that responsibility very seriously because while you said, I get excited, I'm like, oh, this is so fun. Like I will forever be a teacher. I think at some point I will have to go back to a classroom because I love being around the excitement of students. That's always my first thought, what makes them excited, what makes them feel welcome. But all of these things matter and have to be sort of put into that discussion and planning so that this is what we intended it to be, which is something positive. And so I'm furiously taking notes on everything you're saying because these are all questions that we need to ask people. And this is where I think for me, the part of this work gets exciting because I love asking people about this and getting their feedback because for me, I'm just supposed to take all of that and kind of put it together and bring it to you. And it's, I don't know, for me, that's a very exciting thing when you think about asking people, how do you feel about this? What would matter to you? It's important.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm gonna let my colleagues go ahead, and then I just have a couple more things after that. So, go ahead. Sorry.
So I just had a quick question. Typically, seniors have decreased, like a shortened fourth marking period. Well, when would that sort of phase out week begin in these schedules if it's listed, or is that calculated after?
They have what?
The phase out week. So they usually don't. They usually have I think sometimes it's the last 2 weeks of school they don't go, and they have a phase out week. Maybe it's a school by school thing, but they have a phase out week, and they usually don't have a full fourth marking period.
I don't think it's posted on this calendar, though. That doesn't.
I don't think
come
we ever
through.
posted it on our calendars. I think it's more of the graduation came, so they don't come anymore.
But you bring up a good point, which is some of the feedback I got last year was to make sure that marking periods 1, 2, and 3 are longer. And so in the build of the draft calendars, especially marking periods 2 and 3 are longer, and marking period 4 is the shortest, because some of the feedback we got was about some of our high school students who are in AP classes. And once you take that AP exam, thinking about getting in as much content and instruction before the AP exam, or like you said, some people graduate 2 weeks earlier than another school, so how do you account for that when you think of our seniors? So that feedback that we got is actually incorporated into the draft calendars in terms of the number of days in the marking periods. And I can talk about that when we look at them.
And I have one more question. Yeah. And the transition day, just remind me, it's been a while. It's a half day, right?
So it's a great question.
Okay. Are we making it a full day?
I got the impression it was going to be a full day, but I was recommending they make it a half day and do it in service.
And so I guess to I think I was asking the question because in previous years, it's the week before school starts. It's a half day, which as a previous parent, it was sort of a inconvenience with it being a half day. So I want to hear what parents have to say about that, but just tell me if it's going to be a half day or a full day. And what I do know is during pre-service that teachers do have a lot of training going on, and between the training they have and trying to get the classroom ready, it just makes it's just tight, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to be conscious of teachers and their week, and if we could move the transition that day to the beginning of the week, what it looks like? 'Cause if it's the same thing and it's just carried over to the next week.
So the
explain it a little
original
more.
idea was a full day. Part of that was an operational piece, which was to run the buses during the actual hours that the buses would run. Because one of the things I learned from being in operations is that when you set up all the bus routes, you have to run them during rush hour and the times when they would actually run to make sure they work. And so sometimes they make adjustments early on as it relates to the bus routes and making sure that everything makes sense. And if we did it sort of at odd times of the day, we may not get that feedback quickly enough to make those adjustments and to let families know early. So that was part of the thinking. The other part of it was that it was an opportunity to do different things. And so when you think about welcoming, our sixth graders may want to learn how to use their lockers. They may want to get to know the staff because it looks different than at an elementary school. Our kindergartners may want to know what school actually feels like for a day.
Does it count as a school day?
So if we were to do.
I heard you ask, but I didn't really, I
Yes.
couldn't really tell what the answer was.
So if we were to do K-6 and 9, according to MSDE, it is a non-instructional day, which means it doesn't count towards the number of days.
Okay, that's what I assumed, because I was like, is everybody else absent that day? I was worried about that. Ms. Warren?
It's a good question. And so for a non-instructional day, like a student orientation day, you wouldn't take attendance. If it were an instructional day, then obviously you would take attendance and have it.
I think it's going to be important. You were talking about getting feedback from the students. I think it's going to be very important to get feedback from the teachers on this because that week of pre-service is pretty full for them. Plus, I'm wondering, and I'm just thinking about my situation for people who live on the school year kind of calendar. If you're a teacher and you know you're going back to work, say, on the 18th, you probably have figured out what you're going to do with your kids for that week. But what happens on that Monday when your kids don't fit into any of these transition day dates? What are they supposed to do then?
It's a great question. Yeah.
I think that's why you need to
That's
get
what I
a
was
little
asking.
bit more input from the teachers and the parents, because I think you're going to find most parents are going to say, no, school opens on Monday.
Correct.
You know?
I think so too.
Yeah, no, and all of that, that's why we sit here and have I'm actually happy now that we are earlier in the cycle of sort of policy management, because a lot of these questions are things that we had thought about asking, and now we really have a lot of time to get that feedback from all of the different groups and think about it from sort of all those different lenses.
Can I get a clarification from Ms. Evans quickly? You said the week before school is generally a half day.
The day that, so I was going to say is the day happened. So the day is going to happen either the week before, like it normally happens, or the following week, which is the same week as school. So it usually happens like that Thursday before the first day, before the week before school starts. And it's usually like the buses will come in the morning as if it's your time to go to school, and then you're done by noon or something like that, and then they come back.
It's a
So it always
3-hour early
it's
dismissal.
3 hours,
Yep.
right. So it's always these transition grades that do what we're talking about. It just doesn't happen the beginning of a new week. It happens towards the end, and it's
Okay, that's what I was clarifying, because
Yep.
we have been doing it that way.
we've
and-
always done it the Thursday before,
So it does work.
and it's a half a day.
Yeah.
So all we're saying is instead of Thursday, which is pre-service week, right? So that means people they either have to hurry up and get their room done because the kids are going to come to school.
They could do
right,
it
for
on
half a
Friday
day.
instead of Thursday, but
Right.
I know, just saying.
And now we're just saying switch it to Monday and make it a full day. Yep. I'm just trying to, okay. So we always do it. We never do it a full day. We do it a half day, and we do it the previous week.
And some schools do some sort of innovative things. I know some schools who have fifth graders or eighth graders will actually send them to their new school on the last day to let them sort of get to know what that looks like. And they actually take the buses that high school students take. My son did that.
Oh, that's fun.
And he was excited. I mean, it was that last day of school, and it was something, and we've talked about that with even bringing in new kindergartners and just sort of looking at ways to welcome people early and often, because some of the research that we find is that you need time to practice belonging at different times of day with different groups of people and in different situations. And so I don't know, it's sort of a really interesting opportunity to really sort of expand that idea of how do we make people feel welcome and want to come to school.
I was just going to say, too, just piggybacking off of what you said about giving students more time. Those transition years, it really is a big deal for our students. And now that I think about it, those couple of hours, it's just not enough for some of our students to get acclimated to from elementary to middle school. So I would really be interested to hear what the parents have to say. And of course, we can survey our teachers as well. And you've gotten that information from our students. So you're saying, so of course you're not asking kindergartners, but are we asking our fifth graders how they feel about going to school? Because all of them know that at some point before sixth grade, I'm going to go to my new school for half a day. How would they feel about going to school for a full day, their new school for a full day? Have you surveyed fifth graders and eighth graders? I know you haven't, but.
So the plan is, I think in my head, the plan was to ask everyone sort of different iterations of that. So for example, fifth grade, what would you want to tell people coming into sort of elementary school? What are you anxious about?
Yes, I like that
going
one.
into middle school, and what would you want to know about beyond getting to meet your teachers and know the order of your classes and how many flights of stairs I have to go up and down? So
would that inform how you would do that transition day? Like how you would plan it?
Because
that makes
even
sense.
things like my son had a day last week where all the clubs presented and the students had the opportunity to sign up for clubs within the school day, where they got to meet the students who chair those, sort of activities, and came home all excited that he had signed up for some clubs. And you could meet, we work a lot with athletics and transportation. You could meet with coaches. You could meet with different staff members and get a sense of who are these people who are here to help me. And get to know different aspects of the school.
Okay.
And even fun things like
Yes.
taking a tour. We were with the Northwood students when they had an orientation day, and they were exhausted running around the school because it was all new. And so even though they weren't necessarily freshmen, they were like, I feel like a freshman. I'm trying to find, this class. And so really thinking about some of those experiences too.
Yeah.
Giving them a chance to get the lay of the land.
Yeah. Well, so, I'm a little excited now. I want to hear what everyone has to say.
Yeah.
And if you can present it in that way, I think it would make a difference for parents. Because what you do want as a parent is you want for your student to be excited about their new school and going. And as much as we can share, like what's to come or what's to be expected. And I think about Mr. Savarno, we were talking about, really kids, what makes kids excited are like the extra things that you're able to do at your school. It may not necessarily be all the learning that's taking place. Sorry, parents. But when I was in school, like I went because my friends were there. It was fun. Yeah. And I liked my teachers. And I never wanted to miss school when I was going, just because of the environment and how people made us feel. So I think the more that kids can understand the community that they're walking into, it could decrease the number of disciplinary incidents that we're seeing, or making people have a stronger sense of belonging very early on. Because when you're young and when you're transitioning, you're scared, you're afraid, and you kind of keep to yourself, right? You just kind of get through it until you're a sophomore and you feel like you really got it down. But if we're making them come into the schools feeling a part of the school and really knowing what's going to happen and what's there for them, it could make a difference. We just had a communication and stakeholder engagement committee meeting yesterday talking about access and the challenges some of our parents are having navigating the system. So as much as we can introduce to our students very early on what's there for them, it could help, because not everybody, our younger daughter and like Mr. Suvarno has a sibling, right? So they don't know what to expect prior to that transition, whereas Sierra had an idea because Sydney was there before her and she can tell her what was going on. But if you're an only child or if you're new to this school district, you just have no idea. So as much as we can present that and really go deep into these communities to share this, because as Ms. Mondrosky said, you know, parents are looking for their other students to be somewhere. And in their mind, traditionally, we've started the first day of the week, no later than the second. And by the time that week rolls around, you want your kids to be where they're supposed to be. And so if they're still at home one more day, that's a higher grocery bill, higher electricity, or just not knowing what they're doing. But as much as we could communicate to them what the idea is and get their feedback and bring it back to us, I'm just interested to hear what people have to say. But with all the questions that my colleagues have asked, which are all good questions, you know, has made me think about it in a little bit of a different way and have a better understanding of what you're trying to do. And I think as much as we can be creative, we should.
Mr. Saverno?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, is there a plan to maybe look into seeing, because you mentioned, right, how on the last day of school, your son was able to go to the next school and ride those buses. So is there maybe a plan to look at the ways that these different schools are engaging these kindergarten students, these sixth grade students, and these ninth grade students into their transition? So maybe if it's something like on the last day of school where they go to the next school, or if it's like, I know some schools run like a barbecue like the day before, or they run club fairs and they have students, like even on like the orientation day, they have some clubs come in and talk to students, or they'll have some of the older students come in and be able to talk one-on-one. I know I've done that at Clarksburg, but I just want to know, is there maybe some sort of
Good idea.
like sort of planning maybe into looking into what these different schools are doing?
There is, and I will tell you the first group that we have met with are some of the people in our office who run kindergarten orientation. And so really thinking about that group and how to welcome them in, and then the conversation turned to, well, this was what my child got to do, going from 5th grade to 6th grade and going from 8th grade to 9th grade. And so really thinking about what that day looks like. And so, yeah, I think any opportunity I'm excited about sort of exploring. And so any of those ideas we welcome to bring to see if they work. And I think what's really great about our school system, and having worked with so many different schools, is that people do amazing things and we don't always know. And so to find those people and those groups who are doing these already and say, oh my gosh, this has worked so well for them, let's see if we can operationalize this across the district, then everyone would benefit.
I have one last question. I'm thinking about it in terms of elementary school, but to be honest, it could be secondary schools as well. If they were to miss school that Monday, would they participate in their specials? Because the following Monday is not a school day, and so then they'd be going a very long time without.
So I will tell you that's a great question, because that's already come up with the idea of, while in high school you naturally have clubs that you can learn about, pep rallies, all these things that make planning for that day somewhat obvious in terms of how to make those exciting things. When you think about elementary school and you think about our littles, what could be exciting for them? Well, one of the things we have talked about is, could they kind of have a sneak peek of all their specials? What could that look like if we wanted them to have sort of some special experiences? So absolutely, yeah.
Good.
So one more question. As we're surveying everyone, could we survey the students that transitioned last year to see what their experience was like, to get feedback from them?
Absolutely.
Mr. Serrano?
Yeah, so I also had a question about the sort of timing from April to May, where it's 5 weeks of, uninterrupted school, no days off. And so, what in my experience, students when going through some of those weeks, it's been, really tough on them, mentally, to be able to have to know like there's no days off, right? Like you have the weekends and that's it. So I guess my question would be like, can we plan to survey students about how they feel about that sort of time frame? Because I know for high schoolers there's AP exams and things along those natures. So usually that timing is really helpful. But for middle schoolers and elementary schoolers, when it's 5 weeks of uninterrupted school, only weekends to kind of tide you through, but it becomes a little bit tougher, which is something, whenever I've gone out to middle schools, they're always like, Pernille, can you get more, days off in the school year? And I'm like, I think we have some restrictions to abide by, but I just wanted to know, like, is there maybe a process around that, or like, what could we do to make sure our middle and elementary schoolers don't have that, 5 weeks of school?
So there is, and I was hoping I could move the slide so we could actually start
Yeah,
talking about some of that.
I was
'cause
going to
I'm-
suggest that we keep moving.
Oh,
to
yes,
let
I'm
you finish
sorry.
your.
Okay, so what we have done is we have brought you two draft calendars. And again, best first thinking, we have the opportunity and the time to have many eyes on this. And, as I transitioned to wearing reading glasses and already made a mistake on it that someone found, we really welcome many eyes and many ideas about this. But our sort of best thinking was taking those first ideas from last year, which is starting before Labor Day, and trying to imagine a longer winter break if possible. What would that look like within the confines of calendaring? And so we have for you two versions. One has a 10-day winter break, and when I say 10 days, I mean 10 school days, so two full weeks
Right.
with the weekends. And then we'll look at the second version in a second, and that is an 8-day version of it. And so we wanted to start with that idea of surveying people to see where their energy was around that, because we had heard that from people, and so we wanted to see what people thought. Because anytime we make a choice where we take days off, we have to find somewhere to put them. And so there's always sort of that give and take with the calendar. And so the two calendars that we bring to you, the main differences between them are the length of the winter break, and with that, slight adjustments in the marking period ends. Both calendars have the same number of days in each marking period. And so that was something that was important that I had heard. 45 for the first one, 47, 47, and then 42. And so both of the calendars also have 181 days because of this transition day, to keep it sort of within that time frame. And the spring break is the same for both of them. And it was aligned to some of the interests we've had previously around the days that are state mandated days, and also trying to align with different holidays and, sort of religious observances. One of the things that we were able to do with the calendars, and I can show you the 8-day one as well, is to have a 4-day weekend in February. We've heard from people, sort of like Mr. Savarno was saying, it's when you get into those weeks where you have a lot of days in a row, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a break. And so trying to look for some of those opportunities. When we build, there's always challenges. And so one of the challenges that we've encountered, and, sort of something that may be something that we want to talk about, is May. And so, Mr. Savarni, you brought up the idea of there's a long time between when we have that early spring break to May, and then if you also look at the week of Memorial Day, there's sort of the 25th and then the 26th and the 27th. And so really thinking about, is that a place where we would want to have an extended break, or would we want to think about things like half days? Half days don't necessarily cost us instructional days as long as we stay within the mandated credit hours. And so to your point, could we ask students and staff, probably equally as important, about that length of time from, let's say, April 15th or 16th through May 22nd, about, sort of having some of those opportunities to have a little bit of a break. And then with that, too, that same idea of when you lay out the calendar, operationally, would people come on the 26th of May, and sort of those conversations too, and for me, those are the fun ones, because the hard work is sort of laying out the big template. Now you can have those conversations where you say, could we put in some half days? Could we look at the impact of the 26th? Do we want to have an 8-day winter break? Do we want to have a 10-day? What does that do operationally? What does that do for families? All those things.
Yeah, she was just to fill my colleagues in, she was laughing about the May 26th, because I said if they're off on the 25th and the 27th, I'd be shocked too if anyone shows up on the 26th. At least my kids would never.
That was my question. Why did we skip the 26th and go to the 27th instead of making it just 2 days together?
Okay, so in the 24-25, one of the things that we were able to do was to identify certain days where we would think about the operational impact. And those days for this particular school year, the 24-25 were Eid, Al-Fitr, and Eid al-Adha, and they change every year.
Okay.
And so that was something that, because we did that last year and because we connected with the community and really talked about that, we wanted to at least attempt to,
Absolutely. Okay. Nope, you explained it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, thank you.
But if we had an extra day, 26 would be it. We have a day to give away.
And that's the fun part of it, where you can have, and we had that last year when we had the general election, and we were trying to think of, it's a Tuesday, who's going to come the Monday, but we wanted to try and acknowledge Diwali on Friday. And so really having those conversations, I think that's the part of this work that is fun, because then you really can get people's feedback and present it and say, okay, here's what everyone said, what makes the most sense. And sometimes it's an operational decision. And sometimes we can do things like have some fun with winter break.
Yeah. Do you have any? Okay. Well, we'll let you go ahead and continue.
Okay.
Then. We're so close.
So like I said, so these are the two versions that were our best thinking. There is the ability to do the minimum winter break, which is 7 days, but that would mean that we would return to school on Friday, January 2nd.
No.
So operationally, as I have learned from being in operations, maybe not the best. So we are not bringing forth that version of a calendar unless you have an interest in it. But these are the two. And like I said, the big difference between them is that 10-day winter break versus the 8-day winter break. And that was one of the things we were hoping to survey people and really, sort of ask, unless you felt strongly one way or the other. And then lastly, what we wanted to kind of do was talk about next steps. And so while this is earlier in the process, we're very excited to, first of all, follow up on all of this discussion we had today, but also do the survey, go out and meet with students, meet with families. I have a really good connection to Northwood because we've done a lot of work with them with our school construction impact team. And so they're one of the schools that I'm really going to be connected with because they all had to move to a school. They're all on a bus now. And so there's so many parts of it that just lend itself to getting feedback. We're excited to meet with different students at different grade levels and ask them these questions about things like a transition day, and ask them questions about, I said when I went to speak to the student leaders last week, the little kids love to talk about winter break and the days that they don't have to have school. And so those conversations are exciting. And then meeting with our different groups. And so I've already reached out to a lot of them to say, hey, can I come? Can we talk about this? I'm excited. We want to talk to students and families and staff and just, really work towards getting more feedback than we got last year and building on what we did last year that was sort of innovative to get more this year. And so always taking good ideas. Big shout out to Shella Cherry, who was the first person to say come.
Yes.
And so that was so exciting to be able to do that last week. And I've already had people respond and say, yes, I have you on the calendar for this. Yes, I'm going to have you come in and speak about this. And then thinking ahead to 26, 27, because one of the things that we like to do is when we look at the calendar, what's something we want to know? Well, 26, 27 has a late Labor Day. Labor Day's the 7th. So that's something that's interesting for us to know. It has a really early Easter, which is part of our state mandated days, and Passover doesn't align with it. And so when we look at things like we're going to have a gubernatorial election that year, right. And so we start to pull those pieces out and use a lot of the feedback that we get for the build of the 25, 26 to inform the 26, 27. And what we would really like to be able to do is bring forth 2 calendars in December.
2 years of calendars.
Yeah, the 25, 26, and 26, 27. And so we're asking for that as well to be able to do that. And so we've already begun to sort of look at that to see what are some of those quirky things that we have to sort of mull through. But a lot of the discussion today and a lot of the build of the 25, 26 would inform the build of the 26, 27.
Is that something you would be able to bring to the October 22nd meeting?
And sure try.
Absolutely. Just, even if it's not complete, just
Absolutely.
something that, so board members can kind of get a sense of how it would flow going into the following year.
Yes, and being the former math teacher, I have a pencil version of it, but absolutely, we can definitely do that.
That would be great. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is about ID. Now, one year we had one date because that's the way it looks on Google, and they came back and said, no, it's the next day. So we're sure of the date.
So I'm so glad you said that, because that is something that now that we move into the part of the feedback where we actually look at real draft calendars, that's where that work happens. And that's where we start to bring in the groups to say, this was our best thinking around the acknowledgement of this. Is this correct?
Right.
And if it's not, then we can easily make that change. But that's now where we bring in experts. So we can kind of do our best first thinking, but we're always going to need to rely on people who are experts in that to, sort of give us that really important feedback that I was able to get last year, and looking forward to doing that again. I've already sort of reached out to some of my people to be like, hey, I need you back. Can you recommend some more people, to help me with some of that work? Because that was a great learning piece of the calendar build that I'm really excited about for this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody have anything else that they want to ask about or discuss? I have one tiny little thing.
Yes.
That's actually so insignificant, I'm almost embarrassed to ask. But for the early release days, would you consider doing like that divide and do yellow on the bottom and green on the top? Because I'm searching these things for these ZRs and my eyes aren't so good. So
Okay, so I have to tell you, full disclosure, I made those myself.
Okay.
And so I tried to do it, and because I was using like a very simplistic version of a program, I didn't. That was my original idea, to have that sort of that mark be the half
Yeah.
So it's half day.
Cut
We
it
can
across and do yellow on the
100%
top,
do that
bottom, and
instead of
green
my
on the
little
top.
early release. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I'm embarrassed to say I tried to do it and Word let me down, but we will have fancier, more qualified people to do that for the actual calendar. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then, exactly. All right, well, it seems as though that's everything for the board on this particular issue. I would like to get a motion to forward the two versions of the 25-26 school year calendar as discussed here to the full Board of Education for additional discussion at its October 22nd, 2024 meeting. And while this will not be part of the vote, you will bring along a calendar potentially for us to look at for 26, 27 as well.
I will, I promise.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Does anyone want to move that?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Great. Thank you so much for all that work.
Oh my gosh,
on
thank
this.
you. This
Like,
was so helpful,
Really,
too.
we really appreciate how
I
much
think
you
the
put
more
into
we
this.
talk about it, the better
And your
it
passion,
gets.
by the way.
Oh, I do. I love it. I get very excited.
Yep. Okay, so moving on to item number 6, that's an item for informational purposes only. Do any of you have any questions or concerns about the item of information? Nope. Well, then, with that, I'm going to move on to item 7, which is adjournment, and thank everyone for being here and for watching, and we are adjourned.